Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on fiduciary-first prospecting in the age of AI. I'm Jack Morgan, Vice President and Head of the AI practice here at Rise Growth Partners, and I'll be guiding our conversation today. I'm incredibly lucky to be joined by two experts in the field. We have Terry Carlson, CFP. She's one of our managing partners and head of partnerships at Rise Growth Partners. She also happens to be the 2026 chair-elect for the CFP board and is a former executive at Charles Schwab and Wealth Enhancement Group. Terry is an expert in her field on client experience and enterprise growth. Welcome, Terry.
Thanks so much, Jack. It's great to be here today.
Awesome. And we also have Stacy Coffey, who is also a CFP. She is a managing director of Advisor Partnership Success and a former leader and executive at Schwab and Wealth Enhancement Group and an expert in planning-led growth and advisor development. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you, Jack. It's nice to be here.
Awesome. Well, as you may recall, we had a webinar a little over a month ago where we started to really hone in on how we think about AI and more specifically, how we apply AI to RIAs within the wealth management space. And this isn't as a buzzword, but really as a tool to accelerate growth through relationships. This is the first stop on that journey of turning strangers into friends, which is all about AI with intents, modern prospecting for fiduciary advisors. The dialogue today is going to examine how fiduciary-first values intersect with AI innovation in wealth management, and we're going to share insights on how technology can help prospect ethically, efficiently, and empathetically so we can strengthen trust from the very first interaction. Now, let's begin with the foundation of today's discussion. We're going to explore the critical role of prospecting as the initial fiduciary act, aiming to really redefine that discovery process around core principles in ethics and trust. But before we do that, I think it's really important to talk about what's happening in the industry today. Now, when we look at some of the stats that are out there, 96% of advisors believe that Gen AI has the potential to transform client service and investment management, while only 41% are actually using one of those solutions today. When we think about those numbers, like the idea that less than half of the current adopters, the transformation believers are current adopters, it's a pretty crazy statistic. And I think as we have the conversation today, we're going to get deeper into that. But the reality is, as we look at the different ways that businesses are going to grow, that AI usage is really showing up in two main areas, which happens to be within onboarding or back office function. We see that across note takers, across tools that are responsible for actions and next best actions. And we see that show up here that 75%, so 3 out of 4 businesses are reporting significant improvements in overall efficiency. Now, before we jump straight into the tech and we jump straight into the AI, I think it's really important that we first understand what fiduciary-first prospecting really means. So Terry, I'm going to start with you. From your perspective, leading partnerships and having served in multiple executive roles, what does fiduciary prospecting look like in practice?
Well, Jack, thanks so much. And I just want to highlight the numbers that are on the screen today. These are growing substantially just in the last 6 months. So as we think about where we are today, 96% and 41%, even in the next 6 months, that will go up really dramatically. And so one of our goals on the webinar today is to share with you some tools, some tips, some ways we could actually adopt the artificial intelligence, the prospecting, in order to save you time, but still get to the right quality outcome. So the question really is, what does fiduciary prospecting really mean? And this is different than maybe the traditional sales-driven outreach. This is really about, first of all, understanding our clients' needs and goals first and foremost, emphasizing transparency in everything we do, and emphasizing alignment with their goals and what they want to accomplish with our approach. And it has less to do with persuasion per se, but more about aligning our approach with the client's needs and making sure we're providing the right solution. It's about genuinely caring about the client's situation and presenting the right solutions to get there. So what does that really mean? It really means leading with discovery versus products or promises per se. We really don't have to talk about a pitch. In this case, it's really about asking questions and understanding. And then as we work with the client, we actually work with them to help identify gaps in their current solutions. We may stress test their financial trajectory, and we're going to provide preliminary guidance and education and ultimately go at the client's pace so that they have the level of clarity that is needed and the confidence in their decisions. And through that fiduciary prospecting, they will be a client for life.
Wow, I love that. I mean, I think that the detail there and understanding kind of the footwork and the foundation of prospecting is absolutely critical. How do you think that's maybe changed over the last 12 months? Like when we think about the implication, the impact of AI there, what do you think is different, we'll say in what we're in November, I guess, of 2025 versus November of 2024?
Well, one of the main things is that we have so much more data and information at our fingertips. And when I've been an advisor for 30 years, a CFP, I've worked with directly with clients. And when I think about even 5 years ago, what we had at our fingertips through, client relationship management systems back then versus today, it has just grown substantially what information we can access through third-party vendors, through various social media websites to help inform our decisions. And maybe in the past, Jack, advisors said they didn't have enough time to prepare and to understand what the client's needs are. They just did a overall, review and then made the recommendations based on what the advisor felt confident in or what he or she knew the most about. Where now, I think the tables have turned a little bit. We have to know more about the client and their situation, and we can do that rather quickly in 10, 15 minutes through the use of AI and spend much more time sharing the solution or the various solutions and letting the client choose without overwhelming them with complexity, but getting much more precise in our solutions so that they have that confidence and clarity walking away. And then they'll refer their other families and friends to me as an advisor to help grow my business.
Yeah, yeah. And within, the broader kind of fiduciary framework that Terry's talking about, like Stacy, like what do you see as where planning-led growth fits in and how does prospecting kind of weave all this together?
Yeah, I mean, planning-led growth to me is such an underutilized opportunity, whether we're even talking about AI or not. And it might, this is probably a very biased panel considering the topic and considering who's on it. But walking in and talking to a client or meeting them, or I guess we're talking about turning strangers into friends, right? They're not even clients. But as we start to talk to those prospects, you can almost always, just within a few questions, start to identify some potential issues or problems that certain clients might end up running into. They may not even know that this is something that they may be encountering in the future, whether it be a liquidity crunch, or maybe they're going through an equity event and they don't know what that means from a tax perspective. As you start to go through the planning process with somebody and using that as a prospecting tool instead of just a solution, it gets you so far down the path in establishing trust with those clients because you're already solving problems that they didn't even necessarily know they have. When you combine that financial plan, or at least some of those financial planning questions, with the power of AI and just learning a little bit about those prospective clients, whether or not they have kids, how old they are, do they have aging parents that they might be taking care of? You combine some of those facts with what we can learn from AI, and this turns into a very, very powerful tool that's not just a financial plan, but it's problem solving before that stranger even becomes a client.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think kind of to your point, you highlighted this, like there's definitely some mindset shifts that have to occur, thinking about where we've come from and where we're going. And, I think the big thing that's being said right now, which is so true, is like AI is not going to take anyone's job, but those that embrace it will. Where do you see AI showing up to help advisors with those shifts, those mindset shifts that are needed as technology and as kind of the times change here?
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of two big areas that come to mind that are pretty straightforward, but very impactful. The very first one is, we can move from kind of personas to actual real life situations. So we talk a lot about personas as we're looking at marketing strategies. Who are we targeting and what are we selling? Who wants to buy this product, right? But when we actually move to financial situations with clients, as opposed to just a persona or a category, we can identify real impactful life situations and life events that are actually happening to that client in real time, or as we talked about, potentially in the future, a little bit of predictive analytics here. So AI really helps us identify those life events that might be on the way based on certain client behaviors or even behaviors that we're seeing online or through their accounts. The other thing is really moving from client or prospect outreach to relevant outreach. I think, this isn't just about prospecting, but one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given when I was a young advisor was stop doing your quarterly reviews. Just stop it. These are based on a calendar flip. The dates are arbitrary. They mean nothing to the client other than it's every 3 months. Now, I'm not saying everybody should stop doing their quarterly reviews, but the recommendation was find what's relevant to the client, find what's valuable before they even know that they need it, and proactively reach out to that person with a solution to that problem. So we talked a little bit about an equity event or a vesting schedule, or what if an insurance policy is expiring and the client doesn't necessarily realize that. If we're combining AI with our CRM and what we already know about the client, we can actually reach out with high value contacts that aren't necessarily just a standard portfolio review or quarterly appointment that you're having simply because of a certain date that you agreed upon.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And I think you're right. Like we all kind of get left to our own devices and we get stuck in the same patterns over and over again. And I think like those mindset shifts and pulling up to be like, what should we be doing differently? How does that show up? What matters to the clients? And, Terry, I know you've said this before, but just thinking about like at the end of the day, AI doesn't really replace anything that we're doing because this is still like such a human centric business. And it's really just an enabler and an accelerator to do that. So I think as we talk through this, right, this is a great foundation on what we mean when we say kind of fiduciary first thinking. And that kind of takes us forward to thinking about really the shift in the focus. And Terry, you had mentioned this from like products and sales and to comprehensive financial planning and kind of thinking about what that transition looks like. So when we think about the human aspects and we think about that transition, Terry, from an enterprise growth perspective, how do firms scale like an approach like this while maintaining that level of authenticity that's so critical in our industry?
Yeah, Jack, I can't emphasize enough. This is a both and conversation. You can use AI as a fiduciary prospecting tool and do it at scale. And really, what that means is having a consistent prospecting model where AI meaningfully supports that first meeting on the wealth management experience and having the data to be able to really drive an efficient conversation and a productive conversation for the client. Because I don't know if sometimes we as advisors realize our clients are busy too. They want to get to the information that's most relevant, most targeted, most customized to them first and foremost, because their time is valuable, as well as our need to scale and to serve more clients and meet more needs. And so there are a couple ideas on how we might do this. So first of all, having a consistent roadmap or workflow to do this, which includes a repeatable process for all advisors on the discovery process. That's very client-centric, and that is documented in workflows. And so if we're using Salesforce, by the way, we should have workflows that take us step by step through this documented process. We're not leaving it to the choice of the advisor. It's a workflow. Now, they can certainly add their own customizations in, but it will include things like risk analysis, right? Where do they fit? Not just on the risk profile, but what are their behaviors when we see a 20% market drop? And really understanding all of that up front, because we talk about behavioral economics, but that's really not just numbers. It's the behaviors that our clients have and understanding that right up front. So a couple ideas here that we want to make sure that we pull in enough data about clients from various sources, and AI can then congregate that data and pull it all together so you have it before your first meeting. And it's starting to drive that scalability. So the client may fill out a form online or in the client or prospecting portal, but when they come in, you're already demonstrating, I know this about you, this about you, this about you. And based on that, here's a couple options for us to go through, which is different from where many advisors spend today. Now they use all of that time to gather that information. Then they have to, develop a second meeting so that they can actually start to prepare the plan. And the most important thing I think we can do for clients in a fiduciary prospecting way is we gather the data before the meeting. We do the analysis and we present some of the options for them. and then we educate them. So for example, let's talk about retirement income. Well, this is a very common need. That's a life event for many clients. And if they need retirement income and they're contacting you for that, let's gather all that information from various sources and then start educating them on our retirement income plan and how that makes our delivery even more effective. Their very first meeting, we're delivering education and value. We're not just selling them a product. But in order to do that, we have to use some of the data that's out there through various sources, make sure we keep it private, make sure we keep it secure, make sure we're not using it to make a recommendation, but we're using it to educate the clients so that they have the clarity and you're already delivering value to them.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, Stacy, like in this new age of AI, and I know Terry touched on a bunch of this, but like, what are you seeing from the firms that we're talking to and that we're supporting at Rise in terms of like tools and frameworks and processes that's helping facilitate that fiduciary first discovery process that Terry just talked about?
Yeah, it is. It's literally all over the place right now. So the great part about this is not everything's been discovered yet. We're still figuring out the best ways to use AI in this prospecting, all the way through building and deepening client relationship process. So there's a number of different things that I'm seeing here. But imagine this: I was talking with one advisor, and they're creating literally a fiduciary intake form or a scan, if you will, almost like if you're going to the doctor. Imagine, Terry just said it'd be great if we could get a lot of their data up front, things like tax returns, statements, and whatnot. If we're lucky enough to have that information up front,
Their mortgage application,
all of it.
Stacy, is a huge reservoir of data.
Yeah, and they're all really really informative. But what if in that very first meeting, you could have you could have a conversation saying, "Thank you, for giving me this data. It's super informative. By the way, just right off the bat, I found a few red flags that I want to address with you. What if there are beneficiary mismatches? What if in looking at past tax return years, you're noticing that the numbers aren't quite lining up, or information on year 2023 is vastly different than 2024? Is that a mistake or is that intentional?" So, from a fiduciary perspective, you could actually look right at the client's data without ever asking them a question and get right to the heart of some things that might really be causing them potential problems in the future, or help you better understand what they truly care about and why they're seeing some variability in some of these different pieces of information they've given you. So I love this idea of kind of a fiduciary intake scan. It's almost like your annual physical when you go to the doctor. The other thing is that I think is a really natural transition, and Terry's already touched on it once, is just predicting those life events. So through that same information that they provide you, like you said, Terry, a mortgage application is a very easy one because we obviously know what the client's going through there. That life event is buying or selling a home. But what are all the things that go along with that? And one of the easiest, most tangible, and powerful ways to use AI is if you're aware of a life event, or if you're predicting through some of the client's behaviors that they're going through a certain life event. This is a great place to create a checklist. So how are they set up right now, but how should they be set up once this life event has happened? If they're having a child, do they need a trust? Do they need a new trust account? Do they need to set up beneficiaries? Is it time to revisit the will? These are all things that you can think through, and you probably as an advisor already have a mental checklist of all of these different things we should do. But AI can make that a very standardized, repeatable process that not only has you having great conversations with your clients, but it actually helps you from missing some of the big things that you might not do if you're just going off of memory.
Yeah, yeah,
Can I just add to that, Jack, if you don't mind?
of course.
'Cause one of the things Stacey talked about are these life events, and you can get this information out there in terms of understanding the client situation. And what I find in a fiduciary approach, the decision is not based on assets alone, right? We hear a lot, well, that client has 5 million, that client has 10 million. Another alternative approach that Stacey's recommending is really understanding what are the complexities in this client's life? What are their life events? Things like approaching retirement, having a current liquidity event, multiple accounts in various places, and their life is extremely complex and they haven't been able to sort through it. Business ownership. We already talked about cash flow changes. Engagement, if they're on my website learning about education, that means they're interested in something like that. So we can take all that. And one of the things that I've always thought, we could have a planning score, like how ready are these clients and prospects ready to do a financial plan? Because not everyone is ready in their entire life. So if we give them a planning score based on the complexity of their life and have that fiduciary conversation, again, they leave with greater clarity and confidence that we'll be able to address this complexity and help them make their decision. The other thing I was thinking about for scaling is really the follow-up. So we talk a lot about the prospecting, but once you have the meeting and now you've delivered information, AI is a terrific summary note, a terrific action planning. So that client leaves with an action plan. So he or she knows we are going to coach them. We are going to take care of them. So whatever we talked about is going to be done. And that is as a planner, as a CFP, that is the number one weakness that we see is we can give all the advice in the world, but unless the action is actually taken, the client is not any more financially secure. So AI can help tremendously in scaling practices in that way.
Yeah, I love that. And I think going back, to your first point, Terry, and then Stacey, to what you had said, like there are so many different life events that can impact you at any given time, right? I mean, these can be things related to just family milestones, jumping into retirement, decisions across your legacy. But I think one that we should talk about, given all the churn that's been happening today in the labor market, is job changes, right? And so I think so many people are impacted by that. And so I know, internally, Terry, we've talked a lot about life events and more specifically job changes and the churn there. We've looked at data supported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Maybe we can touch a little bit on like what are we seeing across the industry as kind of the expectations and standards of what's been happening within that kind of job change journey.
Well, one of the things I think about as a certified financial planner is all the life events that people go through. And we had it on the screen, but things like marriage and divorce, right? Divorce is a major life event that people go through that you can actually support with AI and proactive advice to help both partners in that case. Estate planning, leaving a legacy, all of our listeners right now should be thinking about automatic triggers for money movement when one of these life events take place. But in this case, we're just going to look at one, which happens quite frequently in the lives of our clients and prospects. So this is just a little bit of data. So it tunes this in. Why is this so important? Because people actually change their career about 13 times in their career timeline. And so that's pretty substantial. And that in generally involves a zip code change. So as Stacey said, when I'm changing jobs, I'm generally changing some form of zip code. That means mortgages. That means 401k rollovers. That means additional insurance that is needed, not just property and casualty, but umbrella insurance, life insurance, oftentimes disability insurance, because now we're moving jobs. Maybe we're moving up, maybe we're moving down, but we're changing a zip code. There's so many financial decisions that take place for a job. And remember, we're doing it 13 times, which for me personally, that's about right. I mean, it is not out of the ordinary to have someone change jobs 13 to 15 times over their 30-year career. So that means we've got career changes happening on a regular basis. You've got 3 to 4 years on average you're staying in your career. Now, this is an average. This is not everyone is in their job 3 to 4 years. Some are longer, some are shorter, but this is an average. And so, for those that are younger, they're usually changing jobs a little bit faster than people who are a little bit older, maybe in their 40s. But I don't think anything applies all the time, but it's something we need to be aware of. And 40% of any time workers plan to change their job in the next year. So this is on our client's mind, on our prospect's mind, and something we can be very proactive in how we think about job change and some of the triggers that we can identify through AI. Privacy is cybersecurity, obviously most important. But if you look at the next slide, we can take a look at what are some of those triggers that happen. So as an advisor, and I've dealt with clients and prospects like this before. And so things that we want to watch overall that might lead to understanding where a client is. And Stacey, I think you were going to take us through these.
Yeah, I just had a couple points on these, but even going back, you don't have to switch the slide back. But what's so interesting about the job change example is we have all of that data and all those statistics on it, and yet job transitions are one of the most underplanned for financial events across the United States. We know some of those big rocks that are really identifiable and predictable that you mentioned, Terry, for sure, and that AI can help us understand better. But I think that AI can also help elevate some of these considerations. So, if we look at a job change, is there anything that we need to consider on the equity comp or from a tax perspective? Is there anything that we need to plan for there? AI can help us model some optimal timing, even things like AMT exposure, which I'm not sure every advisor is comfortable talking about, but with the help of AI, you might be able to address that proactively and at least get the right professionals involved that can uh, give the proper guidance on that front. Another one is benefits change. So imagine if you could take your clients' benefits from their job that they currently have and are potentially leaving and compare them to what they're being offered at a new role and look at the delta. That is absolutely something AI can help us with. Is you're going to have a gap over here, but your coverage is doubled up over here. So you're seeing the pros and cons in real time of a job that you're potentially leaving and one that you're considering taking. I don't know that there's a lot of people out there doing that right now, but this is something that AI could do in very short order. Jack, I'll look to your guidance on how we do that safely and securely and from a compliant perspective. But imagine bringing that to your client's attention when they don't realize that they might be losing 50% of their life insurance coverage through a job change. I mean, that's a major, major financial planning component that they need to take into account across the rest of their financial plan, not just their job change. So looking at old employer benefits versus new ones, I mean, you guys can see some of these, but the other one that I always like to point out is a change in spending or a move to liquidity. And I think we've seen this in a number of different roles just across our experience here. But one of the number one leading indicators that we might be able to use AI for, at least to scan our practices. And I'm assuming a lot of these strangers have become friends and now friends have become clients. But if they start to move to cash, that's usually a giant red flag. They've lost some sort of connection to their portfolio and to their financial plan. And when you have AI triggering an alert to you to say, hey, Terry Carlson moved her entire portfolio to cash, I will tell you that would be my first call as an advisor that next morning. It's one of the leading indicators of people actually leaving their advisor altogether, not just abandoning their financial plan or abandoning their investment plan. It often means that there's no connection to that firm, to that advisor, or to the plan anymore. So we want to make sure that we re-engage with that. AI is a tool that we can use to actually predict when that might be happening and get us in front of clients before they make another poor decision.
Yeah. And what I love about this conversation is that, it's really the first time that we've been able to have a system that contextualize what's happening. Like, we've had data and we've had automation, we've had all these different things, but it's really the first time that we've had something that can think like us and connect the dots and see, like, okay, hold on a second. Like, we're seeing liquidity here, we're seeing zip codes there. Like, that the propensity it's indicative of something's happening. We need to reach out. We need to stay warm. We need to stay in contact. But I think what's really important too, as we talk about everything related to AI, is that the use of AI is all around figuring out the opportunities for alignment, and it's not just all about automation. Like, the reality is that this hype curve of AI, where we think about how we were talking about this 6-8 months ago versus where we are now, is I think we're calming, and I think people are realizing that AI isn't going to solve everything. However, there are definitely some undeniable statistics that lead us to believe that AI is just going to become more and more embedded in every advisory practice. An inspiring 90% of advisors believe that AI can help their book grow organically by 20%. So that's like, when I hear that 90% believe that it's going to help them grow their book by that much, it's absolutely incredible. And then as we look at the other statistic here on the right, 80% of advisors believe that complex financial data can all be accurately translated and analyzed by AI for actionable insights. What does that mean? That means things like proposal, doc ingestion for onboarding, annual review prep. Like, the list goes on and on of the opportunities that we can see of where AI is going to come into the picture and really help aligned to some of the responsibilities that are showing up day in and day out. And then this is probably one of my favorite statistics around cost savings, because we can save all this time, but at the end of the day, if we can't roll it into like a tangible savings, it can be tricky, it can be difficult. But according to Tiff and Sage in a study they did with Accenture, they believe that AI will help fee-based businesses save 20% annually just within the compliance and governance space alone, which is pretty crazy. But I think, again, like when we look at all this and we have to take into consideration, again, like maintaining the human approach, it's so critical. So, I mean, Terry, when you look at these numbers and you think about this and it's AI this and technology that, like how do we ensure that AI recommendations are reviewed and validated by humans to uphold the duty of care and not kind of just offboard technology to kind of do the work for us?
Well, I think that's a really good question and something that we're all pondering at this time. But I've always thought about technology as an enabler. So when we think about, how we go about our data and our recommendations as a part of a CFP doing ethically competent plans with integrity, we have to remember that AI is a support tool, not a decision maker. And that is essential for maintaining our fiduciary responsibility as an advisor, as a certified financial planner. And we want to make sure that we're always using our own professional judgment and not replacing it with an AI tool. And that really involves making sure, from a decision standpoint, AI is providing the inputs, but not the outputs. AI generates suggestions, but not necessarily the advice. We still own that advice. And AI's role is augmentative, not authoritative. And so if we keep that in mind, what that means for us as leaders in firms is that we need to have policy and procedures around how we actually use AI in client interactions. We have to have policies and documentation on how we keep this data private and we're not sharing it amongst third-party vendors and allowing people to sell any data. We also need to make sure that we have a compliance review done by a certified financial planner or compliance. So anything that goes out either as education or recommendations has the stamp of approval of a fiduciary that's seen it, knows it, and can explain it as a part of that process. So we'll save time on the front end, we'll save time on the back end, but the human needs to be involved in every step of the way to make sure that the recommendations are appropriate and the best thing for that client.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you did a really good job too, highlighting like the guardrails that we should be putting in place when we're implementing AI and prospecting and really just across the board for a firm. And I think it's tricky because the pace of which and the speed of which things are changing, I think there's a lot of pressure from not just the industry, but also just peer groups within the firms themselves to go faster. And I think that sometimes it can be exciting and riveting to be kind of at the front edge of what's happening, but it can also be risky. And so when we think about those things, right? And I think Stacey, like during this conversation, I could definitely tell like you have an opinion and a tilt as it relates to balancing AI efficiency with that personal touch. How do we balance the efficiency that AI provides with that personal touch that all fiduciary relationships require?
Yeah, I'm going back to what Terry was just talking about. I had just read a quote that said something along the lines of, AI can draft, but advisors still must decide. So it might help us get to close to a decision, but we still need that human overlay. I think AI is here to help us be better advisors, not to replace us. If you can save 30 minutes in some way, shape, or form by utilizing AI and getting 80% down the road to solving a problem for a client, but then you actually spend that 30 minutes that you just saved with the client to better understand their situation and to deepen that relationship, I'm not sure that there's much more of a fiduciary action that you could possibly take than understanding the client's situation even better than you did before, and then utilizing AI to come up with an even better solution. So, automate what you can, use AI for what you can, but there are certain things that will never be replaced by AI, and that is the engagement that you have with the client, the emotion that you show. We all know that we're not always giving good news as advisors, so walking clients through what their different options are to handle some of these different and difficult life choices is a huge act as a fiduciary on behalf of your client. It's not just the investment solution you give them or the financial plan you give them. It's actually really deepening that relationship and understanding what's important to them so you can help them tackle the most important priorities in their lives. When it
Hey,
comes
Yeah.
to
Stacy, can I jump in there? You know, I think about this concept of turning strangers into friends, and I love that. Like, I've got lots of friends. And when I have friends, I know a lot more about them than a stranger. Right? I understand their family dynamics generally. I understand their emotional readiness for things like this. I understand their personal values in this. And I see some of their behaviors, good, bad, and ugly, right? When you have a good friend, you see all of these things. And AI does not know those things. So if you want to turn a stranger into friend, you have to spend some time with them, getting to know them, their emotional readiness, their behavioral challenges, and when we have down markets or up markets, how they make decisions. All of that is critical that a human can evaluate at this time. AI cannot. And this is where our duty of care as a CFP professional or an advisor and a fiduciary is really exercised most directly in these scenarios.
Yeah, no, I love that, Terry, and it's such a good point. I mean, just thinking about those relationships, and I always say this, right? Like when we talk to the different firms that we support and others, is like everything is probably automable, but should it be? And so I think also holding the hard line at a firm of like, what are your standards as we think about where we apply technology and AI and where we won't, even if it can. Again, that's kind of another, I would say, a softer guardrail that we kind of have to hold ourselves to bring up that standard. Now, we've talked about this a little bit through today's conversation, but we haven't hit it directly. But it's really around when we think about AI implementation, there isn't a lot of industry advice available yet. There isn't a lot in terms of regulatory requirements on how we're handling in terms of ethical handling of data and how that aligns to CFP standards. And so I think that's a place where some firms get a little nervous. Like I think they're a little scared to say, where do we jump in? Why do we not jump in? Going back 41% only of firms today are using some kind of AI at their firm. I think a lot of it has to do with the concern of compliance and governance. And so when we think about the ethical considerations, I mean, Terry, as a CFP, what do you believe the key ethical considerations are when we're utilizing client data?
Well, we already talked about AI can certainly help us understand client needs a little bit better, but really in order to take that to our ultimate goal is around integrity, competence, confidentiality, fairness, and diligence. Those are the important components we as advisors commit to our prospects and clients. So in this scenario, there's not a lot out there, but in general, what we really ask for is that the clients have informed consent, that it's not assumed assent. So clients need to explicitly understand what data is being collected, how is it being used, what role AI is playing in that analysis, and how the data informs different plans, different recommendations, different solutions, and different levels of personalization. And that consent from the client must be given freely, and it needs to be very specific, and it needs to be documented so we know that. And we need to check in with clients because AI is rapidly changing each and every month, each and every quarter. And so when we're working with the client, we need to actually disclose how we're using AI, how it will show up in their lives, but how the human being, their advisor, is ultimately, remember, the decision maker, not the actual AI is. And I think if we can be very transparent in those cases, I think we can really leverage this to serve more clients and meet more needs, which is all of our goals.
Yeah, and I think one thing when we think about prospecting, I think it can be tricky and it's a little slippery because a lot of the prospecting supported AI tools that are out there, so like an AI Identified, Affinity, what they do really well is they aggregate public data across the U.S. and individuals, obviously that reside here. And so I think what's really important as we think about AI-driven prospecting and how all that comes together. And to your point, Terry, it's really around like use the data to obviously understand the client dynamic, but you can't just trust it at face value. Like you need to still like that's use it as a springboard, if you will, to have the conversations and understand your client and so on and so forth. But I think one neat thing about the data that's available from these AI solutions for prospecting is that it does give advisors an edge on how to understand and align with clients that have similar ideologies and values to them, like looking for individuals that specifically show up maybe in philanthropy or in donors clubs and things like that. I think that's where we see a lot of benefit of the AI driven prospecting. But it's definitely a trust but verify when we think about the uses of that data. Now, all that considered, I mean, Stacey, from that advisor development perspective, what's the kind of the best way to train advisors or train the firm on taking these ethical considerations into account?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Terry said around making sure that the clients are very aware of where we do and don't use AI. But where that has to start is educating our advisors on where we do and don't use AI, and that can be done in a couple different ways. Number one, I think there's a million new case studies that are being developed literally every single day based on how people are using AI right now. But really case-based ethics, if we can study what has gone well or what has gone sideways in any given situation, especially if it's based on a real life situation with a client, I think highlighting those, making sure that your advisors are educated on those and understand where the decision may have gone sideways is really, really critical, and will probably become part of our standard training, just like any other training, whether you're doing continuing education for the CFP or a license that you have. AI is already kind of popping up as one of those courses that you can take lots and lots of, or one of those topics you can take lots and lots of courses on to make sure that you're using it in the right way. The other thing is just
Yeah.
internally, advisors knowing what the model can do, but also what it's not supposed to do, Jack. I mean, you've brought up a number of times that some of these new note takers, which are fabulous, especially to become more efficient in client meetings, building agendas, highlighting certain topics, follow-up items, they're also claiming that they can do other things. And it's because they're toe dipping into those other areas. And you want to make sure that the companies that you're signing up with to provide some of these AI services and support actually specialize in the areas that they say that they do. So doing a lot of due diligence, testing and learning, making sure that this is the right tool for your particular firm or for your practice is huge. And then the last thing I'll say about this is if you or your advisors can't explain why an AI recommendation was made, you probably shouldn't be making it. So there's the human element, right? Like if you can't understand where this logic came from, then do your research and make sure that you are really comfortable, because once you give that advice, that fiduciary standard lives with you, and it's not going to hold up very well if you blame it on whatever AI model you're using.
Yeah, and the SEC or the CFP Board of Enforcement isn't going to receive a excuse of, well, I didn't do it, it was AI. That's never going to fly with any enforcement committee. So we at the end of the day, we're still responsible for recommendations.
Yeah, I feel like the AI made me do it is the new dog ate my homework. Unfortunately, that's where we are. Well, as we wrap up the discussion today, let's look ahead and talk about the leadership opportunity this presents. Because I know we're talking about ethics and this, that, and the other, but at the end of the day, it's not meant to, I think, scare or deter. I think it's really just meant to reinforce that whatever we do, we need to do it responsibly and respectfully for the individuals that we support. So, I mean, as we think about the inevitable future, I mean, Terry, what are your thoughts? We think about the near-term impact, we think about projected AI usage. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, first and foremost, as a leader of an RIA or as a wealth management firm, as a leader, we need to understand what we're working with here. I always call it eat your own cooking. So if we're talking about AI, we better be using it ourselves and really understanding it. There's a lot of courses out there now where you can take much more education on leveraging AI, not just in wealth management, but in general. And this is going to be an ever-changing field. So I first and foremost recommend that we as leaders are up to date on the current AI recommendations, and two, have a process to continue our learning. So we're growing through this process and helping our teams do that as well. The only other thing I would just emphasize as we finish our conversation here is that AI is a decision support tool. it really still requires that we as advisors continually create context for these recommendations and maintain transparency so that we're reviewing it and allowing and approving these recommendations. This will always drive the very best financial advice for our clients and prospects.
Yeah, and as we conclude today, like one thing that I'd like to close out with from both of you is sharing maybe one key action step that you would recommend an advisor or a firm take immediately to think specifically within, again, this turning strangers into friends. So fiduciary first AI prospecting, like what's the one thing that you would recommend they start with? And Stacy, I'm gonna go with you first.
Okay, let's see. The first one I would try, well, number one is, and Jack, I'm going to turn this question back to you too, because the advice that I'm giving is with the assumption that we are in a safe AI environment in whatever firm we're using this on. But the next time you have that prospect meeting, I would highly, highly recommend, if you have access to it, in a safe environment, doing deep research on that client, just hitting the deep research button instead of the search type button, if you will, and finding out a little bit more about your client. Now, it's not, I will just say, fair warning, as we all know, it may not be 100% accurate. But I can promise you that a big, big part of what comes back when you hit deep research on your next prospect meeting is you're going to get a lot of great background information that might take you hours, weeks, or years of a relationship to find out. And it'll at least give you a little bit of a tip off to say, hey, here are some of the things that we think might be really, really important to this client. We know they have 3 kids. We know that one of them's approaching college age. We know that they just recently moved from Arizona to California. All of these things can be very beneficial, not just from a planning perspective and from a fiduciary perspective, but also just for speeding up that time for the client to actually trust you and want to become a client as opposed to a prospect.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. I think like that deep research function in any of these general AI tools that are out there is so it's so powerful and impactful. And I think like you kind of have to test it a little bit and play with it to figure it out. But I definitely think it can give you an edge going into any conversation. Terry, over to you. What's one key action step that you would recommend a firm try or implement when we think about fiduciary first AI prospect?
Well, because so many of us are testing the water with AI and we're learning as we're growing. I've given a lot of thoughts on the plan and the fiduciary responsibility of the data. But one thing I want to emphasize as an operator of a firm is that we have absolute requirement to protect client information. And so if I were to say my action step is if you don't know if your client information leveraging AI is protected, you need to find out if you have encryption going on. How strict are your access controls for other employees getting this data? And how have you segregated this data so that it's not available to anyone overall outside of your firm? So those are just the bare basics. But if you're not sure, I'd highly recommend that you talk to someone, even at Rise Growth, so we can figure out how to help you with that.
Yeah, I love that, Terry. Did not know that you were a modern day CISO as well. So we'll definitely put the feather in the cap on that one.
Hey, Jack.
Well, hey, thank you both, Terry and Stacey, for this discussion. Oh,
real quick, Jack.
Go ahead, Stacey.
I want you to answer this question because you have the platform lens, and I would love to hear what your first action item would be.
My first action item. Well, I would have gone with deep research for sure, in a safe environment, to Terry's point. I think, this is going to sound probably elementary, but honestly, the first action item that I would recommend is like sitting down and having that tabletop discussion of how would we do this? What would this look like? What questions would we ask? Because I think a lot of these tools are implemented by firms and by leaders that just say, we bought the tool, we're ready to go. And it's not that simple. We have to understand how we're going to use it. How are we going to know if it's successful? How are we going to know if it failed? And so understanding kind of what the risk register is, if you will, which is like the set of use cases and what was successful and so on and so forth. But it starts with that tabletop exercise and whiteboarding out, like, if we do this, then what? If we do this, then what? And I think wrapping in the pieces around governance and security, as well as deep research, and then using that information and packaging it, I think that is the first step, is just have a conversation about it, understand what your firm's measure of success is going to look like for it before you really even start the process.
Great.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to close this out. Thank you again, Terry and Stacey, for the discussion today. To our audience, the future of wealth management depends on leaders like you who are prioritizing ethical innovation and client-first principles. If you're not already, please be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks.